My name is Charlotte Hayes, and I'm 28 years old. 6 months ago, I thought my stepmother was trying to help me lose weight with her homemade protein shakes and special meal plans. Instead, she was slowly killing me with arsenic. What she thought would be the perfect murder became her confession when my doctor ran tests that exposed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When my mother died in a car accident 3 years ago, my father Marcus was devastated. They'd been married for 26 years, high school sweethearts who built a successful organic farming business together in Riverside Valley. Mom was the heart of our family, the one who kept Dad grounded and me connected to home even after I moved to Denver for my graphic design career. Her sudden death left a void that seemed impossible to fill. Dad threw himself into work, spending 18-hour days in the fields and greenhouse operations that had been their shared dream. I worried about him during my weekend visits, watching him lose weight and retreat into silence. So, when he met Vanessa Chen at a grief counseling group 8 months later, I was cautiously optimistic. She was 42 to his 57, a former pharmaceutical sales representative who'd lost her husband to cancer 2 years prior. She seemed to understand his pain in ways I couldn't. Vanessa was everything my mother wasn't. Where Mom had been warm and nurturing, Vanessa was polished and efficient. Where Mom loved cooking elaborate Sunday dinners, Vanessa preferred ordering catered meals. Where Mom wore her graying hair in a simple ponytail and dressed in comfortable jeans, Vanessa maintained perfect highlights and always looked like she'd stepped out of a business magazine. Dad seemed energized by the difference, telling me she brought structure to his chaos. Their relationship moved quickly. Within 6 months, Vanessa had moved into our family farmhouse, the same house where I'd grown up helping Mom tend her herb garden and learning to bake sourdough bread. Within a year, they were married in a small ceremony at the town hall. I'd flown in from Denver, trying to be supportive, even as I noticed how Vanessa had already begun redecorating Mom's kitchen, replacing her hand-painted ceramic dishes with sleek white dinnerware that looked sterile and cold. The changes started small. Vanessa convinced Dad that the farmhouse needed updating to match her sophisticated taste. Mom's quilts disappeared from the living room, replaced by modern abstract art. The family photos that had lined the hallway were reduced to a few formal shots, with most of Mom's pictures relegated to a single shelf in Dad's study. When I protested, Vanessa smiled sympathetically and explained that Dad needed to move forward, not live in a shrine to the past. I might have accepted the redecorating, even the way she subtly discouraged Dad from talking about Mom during family dinners. But then Vanessa started focusing on me with an intensity that felt uncomfortable. During my monthly visits, she'd comment on my appearance with concerned observations disguised as care. "Charlotte, honey, you look tired. Are you eating enough vegetables? You know, stress shows in your complexion. Have you considered a detox program?" I worked long hours as a freelance graphic designer, often surviving on coffee and takeout during busy periods. I'd always been naturally thin, like my mother, but Vanessa seemed convinced I was malnourished and unhealthy. She began preparing special meals during my visits, organic smoothies packed with superfoods and carefully portioned plates of what she called nutrient-dense combinations. The food tasted bitter and left me feeling queasy, but I choked it down to avoid conflict. Dad seemed pleased that Vanessa was taking such an interest in my health. "Look how she cares about you," he'd say proudly. "She's researched all these supplements and meal plans specifically for your lifestyle." Vanessa would beam and explain her background in pharmaceutical sales had taught her about nutrition and wellness. She'd even started a blog about healthy living, using our family as her case study for transformation. The real manipulation began about a year after their marriage. During one visit, Vanessa pulled me aside with tears in her eyes. "Your father is worried about you, Charlotte. He thinks you're working too hard, not taking care of yourself. He asked me to help because he's afraid of losing you, like he lost your mother." She handed me a container of protein powder and a detailed meal plan. "This is specially formulated for your body type and stress levels. Will you try it for me? For him?" The guilt was expertly applied. Dad had already lost his wife. How could I refuse to let his new wife help me stay healthy? I agreed to follow her nutrition program, even allowing her to ship weekly care packages to my Denver apartment filled with her homemade protein shakes, energy bars, and supplement capsules. The shakes were particularly vile, tasting metallic and leaving a strange coating in my mouth, but Vanessa assured me that meant they were working to detoxify my system. Within 2 months of starting Vanessa's program, I began feeling sick. It started with persistent stomach pain and nausea that I attributed to work stress. Then came the fatigue that coffee couldn't touch, the headaches that lasted for days, and a strange tingling in my hands and feet. My hair started falling out in alarming quantities, and my skin took on a grayish pallor that made clients ask if I was feeling all right during video calls. I mentioned these symptoms to Vanessa during our weekly check-in calls, and she expressed deep concern. "Those are classic signs of toxin overload," she explained with authority. "Your body is purging years of accumulated chemicals from processed foods and environmental pollutants. We need to increase your detox protocol." She sent stronger supplements and insisted I drink 3 protein shakes daily instead of 1. The symptoms worsened. I found myself struggling to concentrate on design projects, forgetting client deadlines, and sleeping 12 hours a day while still feeling exhausted. I mentioned these symptoms to Vanessa during our weekly check-in calls, and she expressed deep concern. "Those are classic signs of toxin overload," she explained with authority. "Your body is purging years of accumulated chemicals from processed foods and environmental pollutants. We need to increase your detox protocol." She sent stronger supplements and insisted I drink 3 protein shakes daily instead of 1. The symptoms worsened. I found myself struggling to concentrate on design projects, forgetting client deadlines, and sleeping 12 hours a day while still feeling exhausted.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
My hands shook so badly I could barely use my computer mouse. Friends started commenting that I looked seriously ill, but when I called Dad to discuss seeing a doctor, Vanessa intercepted the conversation. "She's just going through a healing crisis," I heard her tell him in the background. "It's normal when the body starts releasing stored toxins. We should increase her program, not stop it. If she goes to a regular doctor, they'll just prescribe chemicals that will undo all our progress." Dad trusted her expertise completely, and I felt trapped between his faith in his wife and my declining health. The breaking point came during a video call with my biggest client, a tech startup that had hired me to redesign their entire brand identity. Midway through presenting my concepts, I experienced what I can only describe as a cognitive blackout. I lost my train of thought completely, stared blankly at the screen for nearly a minute, then tried to continue as if nothing had happened. The client's concerned faces told me everything I needed to know about how I appeared to the outside world. That afternoon, I drove myself to Denver General Hospital's emergency room, ignoring 3 increasingly frantic calls from Vanessa, who seemed to have some supernatural ability to know when I was deviating from her health plan. I told the triage nurse I thought I was having some kind of neurological episode and described my symptoms over the past 3 months. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the emergency physician who treated me, took one look at my condition and ordered comprehensive blood work. "Your symptoms suggest possible heavy metal poisoning," she said grimly. "Have you been exposed to any industrial chemicals, old paint, or contaminated water?" I explained about Vanessa's nutrition program, bringing out my phone to show pictures of the supplements and protein powders she'd been sending. Dr. Martinez studied the images with growing concern. "I want to run specific tests for arsenic, mercury, and other toxic metals. These symptoms, combined with the timeline you've described, are very concerning. Some of these supplement labels don't list FDA approval numbers, and a protein powder appears to be homemade rather than commercially produced." As I sat in the hospital waiting room for test results, I finally allowed myself to consider the possibility that had been lurking in the back of my mind for weeks. Vanessa wasn't trying to help me get healthy. She was systematically poisoning me, and I'd been so manipulated by her concern and Dad's trust that I'd been drinking poison for months, thinking it was medicine. The blood tests would either confirm my worst fears or prove that I was paranoid and ungrateful toward a stepmother who genuinely cared about my well-being. Either way, I was about to discover the truth about what Vanessa had really been feeding me all these months. The blood test results came back 3 hours later, and Dr. Martinez's expression told me everything before she spoke a word. Charlotte, your arsenic levels are dangerously elevated. We're talking about chronic poisoning over an extended period. This isn't accidental exposure. Someone has been deliberately administering arsenic to you in regular doses. My hands started shaking as the reality hit me. Vanessa had been poisoning me for months, slowly and methodically, under the guise of helping me achieve optimal health. The protein shakes, the energy bars, the carefully crafted meal plans, all of it had been laced with enough arsenic to kill me gradually without raising immediate suspicion. If I hadn't come to the hospital when I did, Dr. Martinez explained, I would likely have suffered organ failure within weeks. The hospital immediately began chelation therapy to remove the heavy metals from my system, but Dr. Martinez was clear about the legal implications. This is attempted murder, Charlotte. You need to contact law enforcement immediately. We're required to report suspected poisoning cases to the authorities. She handed me a card for Detective Lisa Moreau with the Denver Police Department's Major Crimes Unit. My first instinct was to call Dad, but something stopped me. How do you tell your father that his beloved wife has been systematically murdering his daughter? How do you shatter someone's world with evidence that the person they trust most is a calculated killer? Instead, I called my best friend from college, Amanda Rodriguez, who worked as a forensic accountant and had always been the most logical person I knew. Amanda arrived at the hospital within an hour, bringing her laptop and a recorder. "We need to document everything before you confront anyone," she said firmly. "If Vanessa realizes you know what she's been doing, she might destroy evidence or escalate her timeline." Amanda helped me create a detailed timeline of my illness, photographing every supplement container I'd brought to the hospital and recording my account of Vanessa's behavior patterns. Detective Moreau met us at the hospital that evening. She was a compact woman in her 40s with steel gray eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. "Poisoning cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute," she explained. "We need substantial evidence beyond the blood tests. The suspect will likely claim accidental contamination or suggest you poisoned yourself. We need to be methodical about building this case." The detective arranged for a search warrant for both the farmhouse and Vanessa's shipments to my apartment. In the meantime, she advised me to act normally, to avoid alerting Vanessa that I was on to her scheme. That meant answering her daily check-in calls from my hospital bed, pretending to be grateful for her continued health guidance while knowing she was asking about the effectiveness of her murder attempts. Vanessa's call came at 7 p.m., right on schedule. "Charlotte, sweetheart, you sound tired. Are you keeping up with your shake routine?" I managed to keep my voice steady as I lied. "Yes, Vanessa, I'm actually feeling a bit better today."
Maybe the detox is finally working. There was a pause on the other end that lasted just a beat too long. "That's wonderful, dear. Remember, consistency is key. Don't skip any doses, especially now that you're seeing progress." After hanging up, I felt sick in an entirely new way. She was coaching me to continue poisoning myself, expressing concern while orchestrating my death. Detective Moreau, who had listened to the call through a speaker, nodded grimly. "Classic manipulation pattern. She's maintaining the helpful facade while ensuring you continue consuming the poison. We recorded everything." The next morning brought a breakthrough when crime scene investigators searched my Denver apartment. They found enough arsenic-laced supplements and protein powder to kill several people. The forensic analysis revealed that Vanessa had been gradually increasing the dosage over time, starting with small amounts that would cause mild symptoms and building to potentially lethal concentrations. Detective Moreau called with even more disturbing news. "We executed the search warrant at the farmhouse this morning. Vanessa wasn't there, claimed she was visiting her sister in Phoenix, but we found extensive evidence in her home office. She'd been researching arsenic poisoning for months, downloading medical journals about symptoms and detection methods. We also found detailed notes about your health complaints and her plans to increase dosages." The most chilling discovery was Vanessa's computer files.
She'd been documenting my decline like a scientific experiment, noting how I responded to different dosages and timing adjustments. One file was titled Project C, with weekly entries describing my symptoms and her analysis of the poisoning's effectiveness. She'd even researched my life insurance policies and the inheritance laws in Colorado, calculating how much money would flow to Dad after my death. But the evidence that sealed her fate was found in the barn where Dad stored farming supplies. Hidden behind bags of organic fertilizer was Vanessa's poison laboratory. She'd been extracting arsenic from commercial rat poison and refining it into powder form that she mixed into my supplements. The setup was sophisticated, with professional scales, protective equipment, and detailed chemistry notes. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was premeditated murder, planned with scientific precision. Detective Moreau arrested Vanessa at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport as she attempted to board a flight to Mexico. She'd apparently realized the investigation was closing in and tried to flee the country. When they searched her luggage, they found more poison supplies, fake identification documents, and over $50,000 in cash that she'd been slowly withdrawing from Dad's accounts. The hardest part was telling Dad. Detective Moreau and I drove to the farmhouse together, where we found him in Mom's old garden, tending to vegetables with the same care she'd once shown her herbs. His face went through every stage of grief simultaneously when we explained what Vanessa had been doing. Disbelief, denial, anger, and finally, a broken sadness that reminded me of how he'd looked after Mom's funeral. "Dad, I'm so sorry," he whispered, holding my hands as if I might disappear. "I brought a killer into our home. I trusted her with your life, and she used that trust to try to murder you." The guilt in his eyes was almost unbearable, but I knew Vanessa had manipulated him just as skillfully as she'd manipulated me. Detective Moreau explained that Vanessa's plan had been nearly perfect. Slow poisoning often goes undiagnosed because the symptoms mimic various illnesses and stress-related conditions. If I hadn't sought medical attention when I did, I would have died of apparent natural causes, and Vanessa would have inherited everything as Dad's grieving widow. She'd even positioned herself as the loving stepmother who'd tried desperately to help her sick stepdaughter. The investigation revealed that this wasn't Vanessa's first attempt at murder. Her supposedly deceased first husband had died of similar symptoms, but his death had been attributed to his cancer treatment. Now authorities in 3 states were reopening cases connected to Vanessa's past, examining other suspicious deaths that had financially benefited her. As I began recovering from the arsenic poisoning, spending my days at the farmhouse with Dad while chelation therapy slowly cleared the poison from my system, I realized how close I'd come to becoming another perfect victim. Vanessa had studied me like a lab specimen, learning exactly how to exploit my guilt about Dad's loneliness and my desire to maintain family harmony. The woman I'd tried so hard to accept as my stepmother had been planning my death from the moment she moved into our home, and she'd almost succeeded, using nothing more than fake concern and homemade health food. Vanessa's trial began 4 months later, and the prosecution's case was airtight. District Attorney Rachel Kim presented evidence that painted a picture of calculated evil disguised as loving care. The jury saw photographs of Vanessa's makeshift laboratory, listened to recordings of her coaching me to continue poison, and examined financial records showing her systematic theft from Dad's accounts. Her defense attorney tried to claim that Vanessa was a devoted wife and stepmother who had accidentally contaminated my supplements while trying to help. But the prosecution demolished that narrative with expert testimony from toxicologists who explained that the arsenic concentrations found in my blood could only result from deliberate, sustained poisoning over months. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a forensic toxicologist from the state crime lab, testified that the poison levels in my supplements showed clear evidence of gradual escalation. The defendant wasn't accidentally contaminating health products, she explained to the jury. She was systematically increasing dosages in a pattern consistent with someone testing lethal thresholds. The final containers we analyzed contained enough arsenic to kill an adult within days. The most damaging testimony came from digital forensics expert Mark Stevens, who had recovered Vanessa's deleted computer files. He presented her research history to the court, showing months of searches for undetectable poisons, inheritance laws, and life insurance claim procedures. One particularly chilling discovery was a deleted document titled Widow's Guise that outlined her plans for Dad's future after my death.
including selling the farm and relocating to a non-extradition country. Dad testified on the third day of the trial, and watching him on the witness stand broke my heart. He described how Vanessa had gradually isolated him from friends who might have questioned her behavior, how she'd convinced him that his grief over Mom made him a poor judge of what I needed, and how she'd positioned herself as the expert on everyone's health and well-being. She told me Charlotte was self-destructive, Dad said, his voice shaking with anger and regret, that she was working too hard, eating poorly, basically killing herself slowly. Vanessa claimed she could save Charlotte where I had failed. She made me believe I was protecting my daughter by letting her take over Charlotte's nutrition program.
The prosecution revealed that Vanessa had been planning my murder from the beginning of her relationship with Dad. Phone records showed she'd contacted private investigators to research our family's financial situation before their first official date. She'd specifically targeted Dad because of his successful business, his grief-related vulnerability, and the fact that I was his only heir. Even more disturbing was the evidence that Vanessa had been practicing her poisoning technique for years. Investigators connected her to the suspicious deaths of 3 elderly clients from her pharmaceutical sales days, all of whom had died of mysterious illnesses after changing their medication routines based on her recommendations. In each case, she'd inherited money or property through befriending isolated victims who'd named her in their wills. The jury also heard testimony about Vanessa's psychological profile from Dr. Richard Chen, a forensic psychiatrist who had evaluated her after her arrest. She exhibits classic traits of a predatory sociopath, he explained. She's highly intelligent, extraordinarily manipulative, and completely lacks empathy for her victims. To her, people are simply resources to be exploited for financial gain. What made Vanessa particularly dangerous, Dr. Chen continued, was her ability to identify and exploit emotional vulnerability. She specifically chose victims who were grieving, lonely, or desperate for connection. She positioned herself as a caregiver and problem solver, gaining trust before systematically destroying her targets. The defense's attempts to paint Vanessa as a misunderstood woman who'd made tragic mistakes fell apart when prosecutors presented evidence of her other victims. Martha Williams, an 80-year-old widow from Vanessa's previous city, had died of apparent heart failure after befriending Vanessa and naming her as beneficiary of her estate. Robert Martinez, a lonely widower Vanessa had met through online dating, had died of kidney failure after she'd convinced him to try her special health regimen. Investigators had exhumed both bodies and found lethal levels of various toxins in their remains. The pattern was identical to my case: gradual poisoning disguised as health improvement, with victims' natural trust and gratitude preventing them from suspecting their caregiver was killing them. During cross-examination, Vanessa finally revealed her true nature. When pressed about her victims, she showed no remorse, only irritation at being caught. "People make choices," she said coldly. "If they choose to trust someone they barely know with their health and finances, that's their decision. I provided services, and I was compensated appropriately." The courtroom fell silent as the jury witnessed the complete absence of human compassion in someone who'd spent years perfecting the appearance of caring. Even her own attorney looked shocked by her callous response to questions about the people she'd murdered. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all charges: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, multiple counts of fraud, and 3 additional murder charges for her previous victims. Judge Patricia Morrison sentenced Vanessa to life in prison without the possibility of parole, calling her crimes among the most calculated and cruel she'd encountered in 20 years on the bench. "You preyed upon the fundamental human need for care and connection," Judge Morrison said during sentencing. "You weaponized trust itself, turning the most basic acts of love and concern into instruments of murder. Your victims died believing someone cared about them, never knowing that person was systematically ending their lives." After the trial, Dad and I began the long process of healing from Vanessa's manipulation. We attended therapy together, working through the guilt and trauma of having a killer in our family. Dad struggled particularly with self-blame, convinced he should have recognized the signs of what Vanessa was doing. Dr. Susan Cooper, our family therapist, helped us understand that Vanessa's manipulation had been professional-level psychological warfare. She specifically chose victims who were predisposed to trust medical advice, who valued family harmony over personal suspicion, and who had been conditioned to defer to authority figures claiming expertise. Recovery was slow and difficult. The arsenic poisoning had caused permanent nerve damage in my hands, ending my graphic design career and forcing me to find new ways to make a living. But the physical damage was less devastating than the psychological impact of learning that someone could smile while systematically murdering me. Dad sold the farmhouse and moved to a small apartment in town, unable to live in the space where Vanessa had perfected her murder plans. We spent months going through Mom's belongings that Vanessa had hidden away, reclaiming pieces of our family history that the killer had tried to erase. The most healing discovery was Mom's recipe box, which we found in the barn where Vanessa had operated her poison laboratory. Hidden behind her chemistry equipment were dozens of index cards in Mom's handwriting, recipes for the comfort foods that had defined our family meals. Dad and I spent weekends learning to make Mom's lasagna and apple pie, reclaiming our kitchen from the memory of Vanessa's contaminated supplements. 18 months after Vanessa's conviction, I received a letter from another potential victim who'd seen news coverage of the trial. Sandra Lewis had been dating a man whose new girlfriend was pushing mysterious health supplements and displaying concerning knowledge about inheritance laws. Her letter included photos, and I immediately recognized Vanessa's psychological tactics in the girlfriend's behavior patterns. I forwarded the information to Detective Moreau, who had been tracking similar cases across multiple states. Vanessa's conviction had encouraged other survivors to come forward, revealing a network of predatory killers who used health and wellness as covers for systematic murder. Today, Dad and I have dinner every Tuesday at the small cafe where Mom used to take me for hot chocolate after school. We talk about everything except Vanessa, focusing instead on rebuilding the trust and connection she'd tried to destroy. Dad has started dating again, this time with women his own age, who have their own careers and no interest in managing anyone else's health. I've learned to recognize the difference between genuine care and manipulative control. Real love doesn't come with requirements to prove trust through blind obedience. Real family doesn't ask you to sacrifice your instincts for their peace of mind. The supplements Vanessa sent me are now evidence in multiple murder investigations. Sometimes I think about how close she came to succeeding, how I almost died believing someone loved me enough to save my life. But mostly, I'm grateful that her overconfidence became her downfall, that her need to document her crimes provided the evidence that stopped her from killing again. Because the truth is, I wasn't Vanessa's first victim, but thanks to one blood test and one doctor who took my symptoms seriously, I was her last. 3 years have passed since Vanessa's conviction, and I've built a completely different life from the ashes of her attempted murder. The nerve damage in my hands meant I could no longer work as a graphic designer, but it opened unexpected doors I never would have considered otherwise. I now work as a victim advocate for the Colorado Attorney General's office, helping other survivors of familial crimes navigate the complex intersection of betrayal and justice. My first case was Elena Vasquez, a 63-year-old grandmother whose son-in-law had been slowly poisoning her with antifreeze mixed into her daily medications. Elena reminded me of myself in those terrifying hospital moments, confused and frightened by symptoms no one could explain, betrayed by someone she'd trusted completely. When I sat with her during the trial preparation, I could see the same disbelief in her eyes that I'd felt when Dr. Martinez first explained my test results.
Working with Elena taught me that Vanessa's crime wasn't unique or even particularly rare. Financial abuse disguised as caregiving happens more often than most people realize, particularly targeting older adults and people with chronic illnesses who depend on others for daily support. The difference in my case was that I'd been young and healthy enough to survive long enough for detection, and lucky enough to have access to medical care that identified the poisoning. The victim advocacy work connected me with Dr. Amanda Foster, a researcher at the University of Colorado who studies criminal poisoning patterns. She invited me to participate in a study examining the psychological profiles of both perpetrators and survivors, hoping to develop better detection protocols for medical professionals. Through her research, I learned that Vanessa represented a specific type of predator known as a healthcare serial killer, someone who uses medical knowledge and caregiving access to commit murders that appear natural.
Dr. Foster's research revealed disturbing statistics about how often these crimes go undetected. Many victims die before anyone suspects poisoning, particularly elderly individuals whose deaths are attributed to age-related health decline. Even when poisoning is suspected, proving intent requires extensive forensic investigation that many jurisdictions lack the resources to pursue thoroughly. My participation in the study led to an unexpected opportunity when Dr. Foster was invited to present our findings at a conference for emergency medicine physicians. She asked me to share my story as a case study, explaining how my symptoms had been misinterpreted initially and what signs might have led to earlier detection. Standing before an auditorium of doctors and nurses, I realized my experience could potentially save other lives by educating medical professionals about recognizing poisoning patterns. The presentation went viral in medical communities after someone recorded it and shared it online. Within weeks, I was receiving emails from physicians across the country who'd encountered similar cases or wanted guidance on suspicious patient presentations. 3 doctors wrote to tell me that my description of symptoms helped them identify poisoning in current patients, leading to arrests and potentially saving lives. This unexpected platform led to consulting work with law enforcement agencies, training investigators to recognize signs of domestic poisoning. Detective Moreau, who had become a close friend during Vanessa's prosecution, connected me with training programs where I could share practical insights about how these crimes develop and what evidence to look for. During one training session in Phoenix, I met Detective Carlos Rivera, who was investigating a case remarkably similar to mine. A young man named David Park had been slowly poisoned by his stepfather using contaminated protein supplements, but David had dismissed his symptoms as work stress until he collapsed at his job. Detective Rivera's investigation had stalled because the stepfather was claiming accidental contamination, using the same defense Vanessa's attorney had attempted. I spent 2 days reviewing Detective Rivera's case files, identifying patterns that matched Vanessa's methodology. The stepfather had researched David's inheritance potential, had gradually isolated him from friends who might notice his declining health, and had documented David's symptoms in what he claimed were health journals, but which actually tracked the poisoning's effectiveness. My analysis helped prosecutors build a stronger case, and the stepfather was ultimately convicted of attempted murder. These consulting experiences taught me that surviving Vanessa's murder attempt had given me unique insights into how these predators operate. I could recognize the psychological manipulation patterns, the way perpetrators position themselves as helpers while systematically destroying their victims, and the specific types of evidence that prove intent rather than accident. The work was emotionally challenging but deeply meaningful. Each case I consulted on represented someone else's family being torn apart by the same type of betrayal I'd experienced. But unlike my situation, many of these families had the benefit of my hard-won knowledge about how to prove what had really happened. Dad became my strongest supporter in this new career path, despite his initial concerns about me constantly reliving our trauma. He understood that helping other families meant Vanessa's crimes had ultimately led to something positive, a way of honoring the victims who hadn't survived their poisoners. Our relationship had healed completely, stronger now than it had been before Vanessa entered our lives. Dad had learned to trust his own instincts again, and I'd learned to value his protective concerns without feeling guilty about them. We'd both developed a healthy skepticism about people who tried too hard to be helpful, particularly around financial or health matters. Dad started dating Sarah Mitchell, a retired teacher who'd been widowed for 5 years and had her own grown children. Sarah brought no agenda beyond companionship, asked nothing about Dad's finances, and actively encouraged our father-daughter relationship rather than trying to limit it. The contrast with Vanessa's manipulative behavior was stark and healing. Last month, I received a letter from Vanessa herself, forwarded through the Victim Services Office because she wasn't allowed to contact me directly. The letter was exactly what I'd expected. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just complaints about her treatment in prison and hints that she'd been wrongfully convicted. She ended by suggesting that my advocacy work proved I was profiting from her situation, implying that I should be grateful for the career opportunities her crimes had provided. I showed the letter to Dr. Cooper during my monthly therapy session, and we discussed how it perfectly illustrated the narcissistic mindset that had driven Vanessa's crimes. Even facing life in prison, she remained convinced that she's the victim, that everyone else had failed to appreciate her good intentions, and that any consequences she faced were unfair persecution. Reading her letter reminded me why the advocacy work was so important. Vanessa represented a type of criminal who appears completely normal, even admirable to casual observers. She'd been an attractive, articulate woman who spoke confidently about health and nutrition, who expressed concern for others' well-being, and who seemed devoted to caring for her family. Without understanding her psychological profile and recognizing the warning signs, other families would continue falling victim to people exactly like her. The letter also reminded me how lucky I'd been, not just lucky to survive, but lucky to have Dr. Martinez as my emergency physician, lucky to have Amanda's analytical support, lucky to have Detective Moreau's thorough investigation, and lucky to live in a jurisdiction with the resources to pursue justice. Many victims of similar crimes don't have access to those advantages. Today, I'm working on a book about recognizing and surviving familial poisoning, collaborating with Dr. Foster to create a resource that could help both potential victims and medical professionals identify these crimes earlier. We're also developing training materials for victim advocates, sharing strategies for supporting survivors through the complex trauma of being betrayed by supposed caregivers. The nerve damage in my hands has stabilized, and I've adapted to using voice recognition software and modified keyboards for my advocacy writing. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have looked like if Vanessa had never entered it, if I'd continued my graphic design career without interruption. But I've come to believe that surviving her murder attempt gave me a purpose I never would have discovered otherwise. Every family I help protect from a predatory caregiver, every medical professional who learns to recognize poisoning symptoms, every law enforcement officer who understands these psychological patterns represents a life potentially saved. Vanessa tried to erase me from existence, but instead, her crimes created ripple effects that continue protecting other potential victims. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.